Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey there, I'm Brian Smith. I want to welcome you to Grief to Growth. And whether this is your first time joining us, or you've been walking on this path with me for a while, I'm grateful that you're here. The show is about more than just coping with loss. It's about understanding life itself. We ask the big questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens when we die? And how do we use our grief as a catalyst for growth? Today, I'm honored to welcome a truly extraordinary guest. His name is Andy Chaleff. Andy is an author, a mentor, and a speaker whose life took a profound turn when at just 18 years old, his mother was killed by a drunk driver, only hours after he had sent her a deeply personal letter. That moment became a defining crack in the armor, leading Andy down a path of radical emotional honesty, soul-deep grief work, and ultimately transformation. Andy's latest book is Dying to Live, and it isn't just about death. It's about embracing the fullness of life, but coming to peace with the inevitable. His writing has been described as part spiritual memoir, part existential roadmap, and completely unfiltered. From helping others write final letters to loved ones to exploring the death of ego and identity, Andy's work is a bold invitation to live vulnerably, clearly, and presently. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about why death can be one of our greatest teachers, how grief evolves over time, and what it means to be truly present. Andy will share what surprised him most in his healing journey, how vulnerability became a guiding force in his life, and the way that his decades abroad reshaped his perspective on self, society, and spirit. And by the end of this episode, I believe you'll walk away with not just insights, but with tools, with a deeper awareness of what it means to show up fully, to connect deeply, and to live without holding back. And as always, I encourage you to keep the conversation going on my Substack. So go to grieftogrowth.substack.com afterwards. You'll find an article there about today's episode. And I'd love for you to share your thoughts, ask your questions, and connect with other listeners who are walking this journey together. And with that, I want to welcome to Grief to Growth, Andy Chaleff.
Thank you, Brian. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. We were just talking before we got started. You're in Jakarta right now.
Yes,
And
I'm
it's
in
about
Jakarta.
4 o'clock in the morning for you.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you getting up so early to do this. I'm at 5 p.m. here in the East Coast in the U.S. So
Yeah.
Andy, we talked about it. I talked about in the introduction. There was a pivotal point in your life. We all have these moments in our life when
Yeah.
your mother was unfortunately killed in a drunk driving accident. So maybe you could start from there and tell me how your journey has unfolded.
Yeah. When you as you get older, you sort of look back at your life and you write the narrative forward again. And you and the first book that I wrote was The Last Letter, which was interesting because I left America maybe 2 years after my mom died.
Mm,
I had to get out because emotionally I didn't feel like I had a support system there. And I think it was like Robin Williams might have said like the loneliest you feel is when you're in a group of people.
mm,
So I kind of felt very lonely in the sense that there were people around, but no one could really meet me in that sadness.
yeah.
And it took 2 years, and I did an exchange program where I went to Australia and I left. But the actual moment of her death, since I didn't have a relationship with my father so much. He was bipolar and very unstable, so she was really everything to me. So when she died, my life felt like kind of it was over. There was a sense that like this woman was what made my life worth living,
Yeah.
right? And it was like it got to the point where I was in collegiate track, and it was a walk on. It was my first year, and it was a few months after her death, and I was on that track, and I competed well enough to make it to the conference finals, which was a big deal as a freshman walk on to be one of the because you can only take a few people to on that team,
Mm-hmm.
and I placed, which was miraculous because
Wow.
I was not like the best of these athletes, but it was a terrible day, windy and rainy, and I just hit my mark and I did my personal best,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't care.
Mm.
And it was maybe one of the saddest moments because I executed a thing that a few months earlier would have meant the world to me. And
Yeah.
I was just empty. I was just completely. And then that was the last time I competed in track.
Wow.
Like I was like, there's nothing more here for me. And then I just ended that part of my life. So in a way, the the process of sort of dying inside and then having to rebuild, that took, a continual lifetime and it still goes on today.
Yeah.
But after 30 years, I left America and I didn't return in those 30 years. And that's when I decided to write that first book and then do this tour where I drove back to America because the story behind the book was that I was taking a sociology of death class. And in the class, I came to grips with the fact that I was going to lose everything I loved. And this was before my mom's death. So I wrote her a letter, um, just knowing that this was something I wanted her to know and understand. And she got that letter only a few hours before she was killed by the drunk driver.
Wow.
And so what I then thought after 30 years of running away, I thought, wow, how how incredible was it that I felt the urgency of life, wrote, and what a great gift it would be to do that same thing on a journey in America, which is then what I did. I traveled America for 3 months and sat with 60 groups and asked the groups to write letters to loved ones as if it would be the last letter that they would send them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very emotional journey, especially after 30 years, or yeah, 30 years of running away from the pain to go back to it. And those sessions were rough. I mean, I didn't make it to a session without crying because what I said was, I spent 30 years running away from the pain. What I'm not going to do is go back and then keep up this false facade of pretense of I can speak about this and manage it emotionally, where actually I couldn't manage it even now when I talk about it, I can feel that deep pain, that well of pain
Mm-hmm.
that's always underneath everything. And then I just said I'm not going to and I every time I told the story I'd cry, and what happened, which I didn't understand at the time, was that the people there, because of my vulnerability, would drop into their own vulnerability,
Yeah.
and they became some of the most intense sessions you can imagine because I didn't know these people a lot of times, and we're only together for, I don't know, say a half an hour to 45 minutes. And now we're crying together and sharing this very deep emotional space. But I realized that that would only be possible if I wasn't guarded in how I was showing up. So I was
Sure.
modeling the space they could meet if they chose to. And if not, obviously that was also fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that letter that you wrote your mother, you said you were taking a sociology of death class. Is that at
Yes.
18? Was this in high
Yeah, at
school or?
18. Yeah. No, no, this was a first year college. This is,
Okay.
it was the one thing I kind of laugh at is that if there's something that I'm not comfortable with, it tends to be the first place I go.
Oh, wow.
So it's very much, even writing this book, this last one, Dying to Live, I've written my three books and I thought, where do I want to go from here? And I thought, what's the least comfortable subject for me to address? And it's this subject. So I guess that's the one, the memoir to death, the first person kind of experience. But
Hmm.
the whole idea was that this is something that's existential dread was something that I knew was there and never really addressed. So I took that class just to kind of go head on into a topic that was uncomfortable for me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very unusual topic for an 18-year-old to go into. Most people at 18 are feeling, immortal. Like I'm never going to
Yeah.
die. So this was an
Yeah.
assignment that you wrote the letter to your mother, I assume. This and
Yeah, actually it wasn't an assignment so much,
okay.
right? It was just it was a moment of deep reflection.
Uh-huh.
And psychology has a term for it. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it was a sense of what does this realization what does it force me to do? And I often live that way. I
Hmm.
actually am very much like I don't ramble through things. If I experience something, I take it fully seriously and say, what does this mean for me? And then I act. And
Hmm.
that's really served me my whole life in
Hmm.
sense of urgency that's created. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I just can't imagine too many 18-year-olds taking the class and then,
Yeah.
writing the letter.
Yeah,
So,
let's say that like from my priorities, it wasn't necessarily going to meet the ladies, right? That took a little bit longer for me to sort of say that's also part of my life. I was very introspective.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously a deep thinker, right? Someone who takes
Yeah.
life seriously and I was talking to someone about this a couple days ago. Our human organism, our bodies are designed to move away from pain. Most of us will do
Yeah.
anything to avoid pain. And it sounds like for you from a very early point was like, okay, this is uncomfortable. Let me lean into it.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way, as you can imagine, that like often seen my life as this: how much pain can I let in without it becoming, pushing me down in a way? So where's the resilience? And there's a boundary there. I notice sometimes I'll expand to too much discomfort, and
Mm,
I'm clear enough to say, okay, let's take it back, let's dial it back a little bit, and let's sort of sit. And maybe it's not a expansion time, it's a contraction time. And I've
hmm.
been in a contraction time the last month or two because the book release and being active in the world and having my own clients, I saw I was overextending myself.
Hmm.
And I did a podcast and I listened back to the podcast, and it made me deeply sad because I saw I wasn't present.
Yeah.
And I could only see it by watching that podcast back. I thought,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
That's very wise. I think, there is this um we're only human. We only have so much capacity for whatever, right? So we need to have that relief valve. And it sounds like you've done a really good job of like, I want to learn from this. I want to go to the places that are uncomfortable, but also to honor your own self-care and knowing where
mm,
to kind of dial that back.
yeah, yeah. And you'll always get lost. I mean, there's no, that I love the Carl Jung, quote, until we make the unconscious conscious, it'll define our lives, and we'll call it fate.
Hmm.
And I do feel like there's a degree to which we do go into that unconscious way of being, self-sabotaging behaviors and patterns that don't serve us. And then you sort of sit back and think, wow, okay, there's something going on here. What is that thing?
Yeah.
And I like to meditate on that thing in doses, and really like sit with the discomfort of what life brings us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're 18 years old and you're handling this sudden loss, and you said didn't seem to have much of a support system here in the U.S. How did you
Hmm.
handle it when you went abroad? How did you go through that?
Well, when you go through it, you have to find a coping mechanism.
Hmm.
You might go
Yeah.
to drugs, you might go to events or parties or whatever the things that are distractions. Well, I went to travel, and I thought, I want to experience life, and I want to like have a rich, full experience. So I traveled. Traveled for 2 years with a backpack. I worked on a sheep and cattle farm in Australia for a few months. I
Hmm.
I just found experiences that would enrich my life, and the more, worked in a factory in Detroit, which, from a kid from LA, was something that was totally out of my understanding of another way of being or living.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to immerse myself in experiences and let those experiences inform who saw or how I saw the world, to grow compassion and understanding for things I didn't have that for.
Hmm.
Living in Japan for 2 years and learning the language and immersing myself in another culture. Those were things that they also fed my identity because that identity wanted to be seen as a world traveler, seen as somebody who could speak languages and all these things you build up as your who I am and why I'm here and what makes my life important and special. So I was
Hmm.
giving my life meaning through that journey, and in the
Okay.
meantime, avoiding the pain of my past.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how do you feel like you were processing your grief during that time, or was this maybe a way of kind of turning away from it a little bit?
No, no, I feel like it was definitely turning away for sure
Okay.
because if you think about it, like leaving America would have meant that all the reminders of my mom would also be behind me.
Yeah.
Going the holidays, having, even, her grave would have been something that would have been near to, now I notice if I'm in Los Angeles and I drive by her cemetery, then I always think of her and there's a melancholy that comes. So
Sure.
separating yourself from all of that really meant that I was building a life completely separate from that, which didn't mean it went away. It just
Right.
meant that I wasn't dealing with it regularly. And
Right.
I'd see it come up. I'd see like, holidays, especially Christmas was really important for my mom.
Hmm.
So I'd see that would be a very triggering time for me, like a really like emotionally exhausting, painful dealing with the reality that the holiday that she appreciated and loved most was one that I couldn't share with her.
Right.
And so that was always a yearly, sad moment for me. But that would have been that would have been it.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
at some point, you decided to write. When do you think maybe you started to turn and face your grief to start to process it?
At 35, I met my mentor. There's that saying when, the mentor will show up when the student's ready. And that,
Hmm.
that, that, that was this Dutch man. I was living in Vienna, Austria, and I did well in business. And he showed up and he was just very confrontational, as Dutch people often are. And he just was like, you're an imposter. You're not honest with yourself. He was just
Hmm.
really laying into me, and he was right, and I knew he was right, and so I basically sold everything I owned in Vienna and did this life do over. I went
Oh,
to
wow.
Amsterdam, lived in an attic. There was no water or no electricity or heating or toilet. Just it was just and I was like, I was free. I was like, wow. I just kept singing. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like, so it was my life do over, and that was 35, and that was when I started to confront the pain.
Okay.
I had to rebuild the relationship with my father, who I was estranged from. We didn't talk for a decade, and then just sort of build a relationship with myself,
Yeah.
which took years to build a relationship with myself.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So that's it's interesting because I've seen people that go through certain grief events and they're just so traumatic that we just can't face them. And maybe we think we've dealt with them, but then we find out 10, 12, 15 years later that we haven't really dug into that grief.
Yeah,
Yeah.
without a doubt. I mean, I'd like to think that it's never really healed. It just finds a place, and then there's almost more gratitude that's given to it. It
Hmm.
it 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 has a a fond, loving space of, the more sad I am, the more grateful I am for that thing that gave me that sadness.
Oh, yeah.
I hold it with a loving compassion, which took a lot of time to find that because it was so much easier to just to live in the woe is me and this is all, hatred of God for doing this to me or whatever the narratives were
Hmm.
that just made it hard to be sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very well said. It's funny. I was just talking to a client like yesterday. We were talking about this is someone whose son has passed away, and he was talking about how grateful he is to his grief and to the
Mm.
pain he's gone through because, like as you said, the reason why you're sad is because you had such a beautiful thing, and being grateful for that thing that you had. It's an interesting relationship with grief, right? We don't like it. It's painful, but it also can help us to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of the feeling in life is I see less and less of this reactivity and more of if I feel a reaction, I sort of go into more of a meditation, like, wow, what is this telling me?
Hmm.
And then what's the hardest thing for me to say? That tends to be the healing modality, if it were, that I use is like, what's the hardest? And if I don't feel tears coming up and then kind of almost a laughter behind it, it's just not deep enough.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
still on the surface. It's still trying to protect itself a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, this wisdom that you have, where do you think I mean, it sounds like it was kind of in there when you were 18.
I mean, there was, it's funny because I'm guessing if I look at myself, I would have been an introspective child, right?
Hmm.
I would have been a thoughtful person in the
Hmm.
sense that there would have been a sensitivity that I was born with. And then my dad being bipolar and very very intense to be around, I had to develop tools and coping mechanisms to survive in that fearful environment.
Mm.
So I would say my predisposition kind of guided me in one direction, and I do believe like having the love of my mom and this dysfunction of my dad really proved to be incredibly um, helpful to integrate and become, because if you don't have something that you need to heal and solve and resolve for yourself, then you really aren't you're not building a life of resilience. It's just you're following the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
So those were the mountains I had to climb, making peace with my mom's death and
Hmm.
making peace with the abusive father I had.
Yeah.
And if you've made peace with that on a very, very fundamental level, like not the peace that's like, oh, I've convinced myself of it, but the honest peace where you're just looking at life through the lens of gratitude,
Hmm.
then I think what you come out with is just you can start holding space for other people who haven't quite made it there yet.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
that's so well said because we a lot of times we think I would like to just live a life of ease and have nothing bad ever happen to me.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, as you said, that doesn't build character, that doesn't build resilience.
Yeah.
The resilience comes from the difficult things. And so being able to have the gratitude even for the difficult things is something that takes most of us a long time to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, I always, when my clients will come and tell me what's going on in their lives and they frame it as horrible, I'll often say I'm really happy that they're going through that,
Mm.
and then they'll usually use a curse word of some sort. But
Sure.
they also know me well enough through the time because they're friends. They're not, I don't have sort of a client list. I have friends I go through life with.
Hmm.
And the reason why I said it is because it's only a problem because you haven't resolved those issues within yourself. So the gift is you've now been given, if it was like the splinter, you now have to sort of move through the healing process where that splinter becomes no more part of your life. And even when I mentor somebody, the first year I'll often take the thing I know triggers them most and I'll just riddle them with it all the time. I'll
Hmm.
say the thing that's most triggering to them over and over again, like building up an immunity. And the idea, I do this consciously. I just want to clarify that I'm not doing it as a jerk.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
that's left open for interpretation. But what I'll do is the moment the trigger hits, I'll switch character and immediately say, so what's going on now?
Hmm.
So how is that? What's coming up for you? What do you feel? What's behind that? And so there's this deepening understanding of your triggered responses because it's really hard to catch those.
Yeah.
They happen so quickly you don't even know you've been triggered, and then there's so many beliefs that you don't even realize you have. So slowing that whole process down and then moving through it is a really beautiful process. That's what I've found. in my journey.
Yeah, I agree with that. I found that, as you said, slowing it down, understanding that you're reacting to this thing, this past trauma, this fear, whatever it is. And most of the times we do it unconsciously. We never think about, that we're reacting to it. So the deliberate exercise of bringing that thing up, which is, again, that's kind of things you've done with yourself. You turn into your own pain instead of turning
Yeah.
away from it. That is something that I think is really necessary if we're going to grow from these things. And we
Yeah.
can, as you found out, we can run for quite a while, but it eventually catches up with us.
Yeah. And you don't get the joy at the back end. You know, you can't promise the joy. You can't say, "Hey, you're taking this journey because it's going to be really great at the end," because you don't know,
Right.
right? But it's like, you know, when people ask me, Andy, why would I go into that? I'll often say, I don't know. I can't tell you. I mean, I can't. I'm not going to convince you to move through the pain that you've avoided. That's not for me to say.
Hmm.
But what I can say is, you can see what not dealing with it has meant for your life. You know, I
Right.
could see all my broken relationships before because I wasn't able to be emotionally vulnerable. So you could have said I was a functioning individual if you looked from the outside, but on the inside, unless I healed those wounds, I wasn't going to get into a mature, loving relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And you used the phrase dying to live quite a bit. What does that phrase mean to you?
You know, the that was the Dying to Live was the book title, and that the book I wrote over 3 or 4 years, and the working title was Learning How to Die.
Hmm.
And that was the title. I loved it, and I stayed with it because I was writing to that exact idea in my head. But when I got to the end, I said, you know, I really would like an American to buy this book.
Hmm.
And as soon as I put "Learning How to Die," I just see everyone saying, "Oh my God, I why would I want that? How
Yeah.
do I, is that going to help me right now?" And my books have always been a little bit of an on ramp, like a you don't need to be spiritual, you don't even need to be very thoughtful. These are simple reads, not difficult words, very human memoir writing. And
Hmm.
what I saw in the words "dying to live" were two things: that a lot of people are dying to stay alive. The concept of an death and the existential loss of whatever identity that they have or believe themselves to have is so strong that they're dying to live.
Hmm.
And the double entendre, the second meaning, which I hold more deeply, is the idea of ego death after ego death after ego death, which then is, oh, now I'm alive. Now I'm alive. When
Hmm.
I've let go of all of the identities, all of the ideas of who Andy is, what Andy should be, who he should be accommodating or not, or what society believes I should have done by a certain age. All of those identities, when we've let those go and we've made complete peace with them, then we're fully able to embody whoever we want to be. So
Hmm.
that dying to live is certainly, I hold that meaning far more in my system than the first one, than the prior. Yeah.
Yeah. So, excuse me, you mentioned ego death.
Yeah.
And people that are listening may or may not understand what that is. What does that mean to you?
Ego death for me, in one of the chapters I write a thing called little deaths. It's
Mm.
these little things that they feel like deaths on an emotional level, but if we were to treat them like death, people would think that we're exaggerating. You know, like selling a childhood home that I was raised in, graduating from high school, leaving a job. Like these things for me were so raw and so intense. They felt like deaths, but you know, if I was to tell people, wow, this is the depth of the pain I have towards this subject, they'd think, you know, come on, like really, there's another job. Don't worry, you know, that those the
Yeah. Hmm.
minimizing those feelings. And what I've seen in my life is whatever I feel myself to be, whatever I want to be seen as, whatever I feel I need to be valued for. Those are parts of my ego and my identity. And if I'm not in touch with those things, we're not talking good or bad. There's
Hmm.
no judgment toward it. But if I'm not in touch with those things, then they will drive me, and I won't even know when they're driving me off a cliff because I'll be so driven by those I parts of my identity that I'm unaware of. Going back
Hmm.
again to the quote that I love so much from Carl Jung, until I make the unconscious conscious,
Hmm.
it'll define my life and I'll call it fate. So where I'm sort of delving into is like, can I make peace with the fact that I'm not going to be seen as important at work? Can I make peace with the fact that I'm a terrible writer? That I'm embarrassed that I put out books that are also feel like they're remedial reading materials?
Hmm.
Like, can I make peace with everything that may or may not also show up in my consciousness, not to make it true, not to validate it, not to create an affirmation around it, but
Hmm.
just to say all of that's okay. Can I cry in the middle of a room with people that I am anxious to because I feel like they might judge me or they might think that maybe and not because I need to cry, but because if that's what is showing up for me and I can't allow myself that freedom, that means there's part of me that's not free to allow that just to be okay.
Hmm.
And so that ego death is for me whenever there's a resistance, then I say, "Whoa, what's going on there?" And then I delve into that and let that become another area for me to learn. It's more of a meditation than solving it. It's like, wow, how is that shaping who I am and
Hmm.
what's behind it?
So this, I guess, leads to a lot of the vulnerability that you have in your writing and the humor that you have in your writing, because you're putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and it's beautiful you picked out those two aspects. The sort of the sadness, right, is one polarity. Like that I'm utterly devastated that my mom was killed by this drunk driver. Like that's a deep, deep pain. And
Sure.
the absurdity that I've created so much weight around that story that it's defined my life. And like,
Mm.
if I can't hold those two in equal measure and sort of laugh at myself without judgment, but the humor and absurdity of life and feel the pain of it simultaneously, those things are something that I want to be holding in equal measure.
Hmm.
If I
Yeah.
move to the pain and the wallowing, then basically all I'm doing is I'm not able to proceed with my life because it's being defined by a narrative I've created around I'll never be loved like I was by my mom. If
Mm-hmm.
I go to my absurdity, then I'm just bypassing that emotion and minimizing it and saying, "Hey, I'm going to pretend like it's not as sad as it really was."
Yeah.
So holding those two and letting that be a balance, it maybe shifts one way or the other way. That's for me the part of like a meditative life. It's like,
Hmm.
where am I and how am I reacting to this subject? Am I sad or am I making jokes so that I don't have to deal with it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I always talk to my clients about, like, we as human beings, where there's balance of, I call it human and divine, or biological and divine. So we have to acknowledge the pain,
Mm.
acknowledge all the crap that we've gone through, and on the one hand, what we've gone through does inform who we are. Our pasts are
Yeah.
important, but on the other hand, we are also this eternal being that can rise above this and transcend it. And finding that space to hold both those things at the same time, that's the challenge of being a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. The absurdity and the divine, it is, that's when I feel like life turns more into a meditation. Life itself, not as
Hmm.
a something I do in the morning, but something that I do continuously as a trigger that happens like, wow, what just happened and why is that impacting me in this way?
Yeah,
And I find that a really beautiful life.
yeah. So can
Mm.
you maybe share a story with us from your book that has defined, like, who you are or how you live?
Wow. there's so many stories in that thing. It was a memoir to death. So
Right.
I really delved into each one of the trying to think if there's one chapter that jumps out at me because a lot of it is the stories that I already discussed. Mm. There's one chapter
Hmm.
which it was an interesting chapter because it's a chapter I wrote and I didn't put it in the first three books because I said, "Oh, that's a little bit too far for my reader."
Yeah.
That's just a little. It was almost like I can't show them how absurd I believe life is. Because
Hmm.
if I show them how absurd I believe life is, they're going to think Andy is a whack job. So I skipped those three. I had it written. I'm like, okay, book one, push it to two, push it to three, and then I'm like, screw it, I'm putting it in. And it was like it was the sense that I have gone through life at a very young age of a constructed reality that we experience. And I wrote about it as in living in the matrix.
Hmm.
So in the sense of I really can almost like I almost see like a movie where everything gets deconstructed in front of my eyes. Sometimes you'll see a movie where they'll show a city that gets built up and they'll build up a city and then they'll show what it was in the 1600s and the 17 and the 18 and the 19 and so on.
Hmm.
And for me, I often kind of see it in reverse in my head. And then I sit a lot with that feeling of, wow, this thing is all constructed. So societal norms are constructed. All of the things that we believe to be true are always made generationally and then structurally around me. And now I've taken those things so serious that I call that reality.
Hmm.
And we know that that reality changes because, one year we say marijuana is illegal, the next year we say it's okay.
Yeah.
One year we say gay marriage is not acceptable, the next it's okay. Like these norms are also things that evolve. And what we think is normal now won't be normal 100 years from now, just like it wasn't 100 years ago.
Hmm.
And so I'm often sitting with the absurdity that this is something we take this seriously. And
Yeah.
that wasn't easy. That wasn't comfortable to write because I'm although I'm living with that sort of sensibility, the readers that I'm engaging with are these are firsthand accounts of living a life where you're going through the pain and really being in the reality of that. So this was a little bit of a departure of this is also who I am,
Yeah.
and it allows me to write. But it is strangely uncomfortable to reveal that because if people really see how absurd you find everything to be, how constructed it is, and how arbitrary on some level,
Hmm.
then like they really like understand that you're kind of living a life where you're also just living this illusion. You're pretending the illusion that everyone else is pretending. But I kind of like say, God, this is really an illusion. So that
Yeah.
that would be a chapter that kind of touched me. That was, my risky one.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I can tell you, for my audience, that's not weird at all.
Yeah,
That's the way I view life. I believe that it is a constructed reality. I love movies like The Matrix,
yeah,
Avatar, etc. And as I talk to people and I hear their stories, I see the arc of people's lives. I get to talk to people and experience their life like in an hour. I was talking to someone the other day. I said, I've experienced your life in an hour, and it reads like a movie script.
mm,
That you would have this guy, you born with this deep sensitivity and all the things you came in with that you talked about that you had within, and then you have these circumstances that have the father and your mother being killed unfortunately when you're at a very early age, and how that has shaped your life. To me, it seems magical.
yeah. It's a Hallmark movie.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I didn't embrace my story until I wrote that first book because I didn't give any meaning to the loss of my mother. I
right.
didn't give any meaning to that letter. I didn't do any of that. And I also felt a little bit like um, I wasn't going to commercialize something because it sounded good or because it
Right.
was a good story. Like I had no interest in that at all.
Yeah.
So what happened was I had to really come to grips with the fact that it did impact my entire life.
Hmm.
And am I going to pretend like it didn't?
Right.
Like that's just absurd. So yeah, it took some time to get there.
Yeah, I have to, it was a thought I had after my daughter passed away. And like 4 or 5 years later, I started like being led to do this work and to do the podcast and all that stuff. And in a sense, it's like, well, am I commercializing? Am I taking advantage
Yeah.
of my daughter's situation? And absolutely not. We all have these stories, and I think by you sharing your story and by you being so vulnerable, it can help other people reflect on their lives and say, yeah, this is. I
Yeah.
can start to see some patterns here.
Yeah. And I think that point you made was the point for me, which is most important, was until I was ready to go into the vulnerability, it would have been a show.
Right, right.
And I realized that I wasn't ready to go into the vulnerability, so then it would have been a show, and then I didn't feel at all integrated in terms of. And when I did this tour through the U.S., that was like me saying, "This is my coming out party." Like
Yeah.
I don't have a choice. I'm not giving myself like even when I said, the first time I did a last letter session. I hadn't done one before. It was the first time I did it. It was the,
Hmm.
the first one I showed up at. Total mess, but we'll leave it at that for the moment. But I said, my mom was killed by a drunk driver, and then when I said the words, I skipped over them like as if they were a statement that had no value or meaning to them.
Hmm.
And I said, "Wow, that wasn't acceptable." And then I said the same sentence again, and then I felt the meaning of those words for me for the first time in 30 years. And now I
Wow.
feel it again, of course.
Yeah.
And that was what I said, I'm not stepping away from that anymore. That is not going to be how I show up in the world. So in that way, that was the first time I began, and that was the second book I wrote was called The Wounded Healer, which was about that journey.
Mm-hmm.
And and yeah, and as you said, embracing your story is really a life of service,
Yeah.
and that life of service is something you only understand when you live it.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just a concept, and that's yeah. My
Yes.
wife,
What?
by the way, just as an aside, just to share with you,
Uh-huh.
she said to me this morning or yesterday, she said to me, "Can you get past all this sad story? Like, I'd like to see you kind of move on to contemporary issues."
Okay. Yeah.
It was really funny how she doesn't see necessarily that being present to that is also being in service to others, and that's it could be addictive, right? Let's also agree that if
Right.
it's if you're wallowing in it, then obviously that isn't good for you or your livelihood but in my sense, I don't see that. I hold it like a dear a dear thing that I cherish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent distinction. It's a very important distinction. Sometimes people get stuck in just telling their story and they never heal from it. They just tell their story.
Yeah.
When I was 18, my mother was killed by a drunk driver. Look how tragic my life is. That's
Yeah.
one thing. It's the other thing to say, this is the thing that was a turning point that informed who I am today and has given me
Mm.
this beautiful gift that I want to share with other people. That's coming
Yeah.
at it from a totally different perspective.
Yeah. And you articulated it well in the sense I didn't have that clear to me because my mentor, I told you how I left, did my life do-over. Well, I did my do-over to go with a mentor. That
Hmm.
mentor then died about 10 years after that
Hmm.
moment. And so I was sort of confronted with what am I going to do with my life now?
Yeah,
And I didn't know, but I just wrote. And
yeah,
I didn't even know what I was going to write. I just started to write, and then I didn't even know it was going to be a life story because for me, I was immortal. I wanted to immortalize him, and as I wrote more about him, it was less and less interesting because people wanted to hear my story, not
yeah,
his story.
yeah,
And then those moments that you're speaking to, those were the things that I saw allowed me to go in my healing journey, and therefore the hero's journey type archetypal journey is one of these things that everyone on some degree is going through it, so we can all identify with it. If
Right.
it's vulnerable, if it's
Right.
told with vulnerability, if it's a story that's trying to be something, people tend to, be a little bit. It becomes a little bit too, glamorized, but the rawness of honest stories are really, really helpful for others.
Yeah, I think so. And I just, it's like we're all kind of all of our stories are unique, but there's also some universality to them. And we can
Hmm.
see each other, we can see ourselves in other people's stories. And sometimes it's easier for us to see the arc of another person's story than our own because
Yeah.
we don't sit down and really reflect on it. We say, this terrible thing happened to me.
Mm,
Now this is one of the advantages of getting older, like I am. It's like I've got a longer arc, and I can see things now that I thought were
yeah.
tragic at the time, and now I'm like, if that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't happen, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be the person that I am.
Yeah, and that goes back to one of my favorite parts of the Dying to Live book was the parable of the farmer and the horse,
Yes. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And that parable being the farmer will always say after a good or a bad event, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. And this idea that there's something that happens and we don't see it as inherently good or bad in that moment, we'll see what it means for the next event. There's surrender in that that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, you could please tell the story.
Oh, the farmer and the horse story
Yeah.
is the farmer is out one day. All his horses run out of the paddock, and he loses the horses. And the neighbor comes to him and says, "Well, that's really a shame. You lost all the horses." And he says, "Well, we'll see." And then the horses came back the next day, and they brought many other horses with them. And then the neighbor said, "Well, you got really lucky." And he said, "Well, we'll see." And then the farmer's son got on one of these new horses to train it. He fell off and broke his arm. And the neighbor said, "Wow, that was really unlucky." And he said, "Well, we'll see." And then the day after that, the military came because they were going to war and they recruited all of the children of the people. And the son couldn't go to war because he had a broken arm.
Hmm.
And then the neighbor said, "Well, you're really lucky." And then he said, "Well, we'll see."
Yeah.
And there's this idea that all of these things in the moment may seem to be negative, but we're not seeing them in light of a bigger journey. And yeah, it's when someone hires me to work, I go into very intense working environments, and they often want me to prove myself and say, "Why would I hire you? What value can you bring?" And I'll say, "I have no idea." Like I really don't. Like like what I can tell you is I've screwed so many things up, like so many, and I have a very good idea of what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like I really know well what doesn't work, but what does work always is new and evolving, and I can't always be sure.
Hmm.
And so there's that wonder of being with the failure is the greatest lesson if I allow it to be, and if I adopt it as almost a working principle going forward.
Yeah, that's one of my all-time favorite stories, and I tell it all the time. There's all these different versions of it. They're slightly different,
Yeah, I was gonna
but
say.
and I tried to adapt that to my life, as much as I possibly can. Doesn't mean we don't have preferences. It doesn't mean that, it's like,
Mm,
I get a cancer diagnosis and I'm going to go, yeah, this is going to be great. But it leaves that space open for curiosity and for patience before we
yeah,
before we jump to a conclusion. And
yeah,
I think that is a great place to work from. That's the place that helps us to build resilience, right? Rather, we don't necessarily panic over things. The world's going crazy right now, and people here in the U.S. are like, "What's going to happen?" And I'm like, "We'll see."
exactly.
You
Yeah, we'll
know,
see. Yeah,
this could be a bad thing. This could be a good thing, but we don't know right now.
yeah. Or you actually would then go back to the idea of it not being good or bad, right? Because if you look at the polarity that's created through societal anxiety right now, which is so prevalent. Like if you look at it and you step back and see it as the process of evolution, that this is part of evolution, then
Hmm.
you kind of embrace the journey and not to say again, not good or bad, because everyone's fighting for good and bad.
Hmm.
You need to take a stand. You need to fight against tyranny or whatever the narratives are back and forth. But he said this clearly is the process we need to go through in order to see what else we're going to reach afterwards. Then there's a surrender to that, which isn't easy,
Hmm.
but it'll test your resolve to the practice of self-soothing.
Yeah.
How much can I make peace within myself in the light of what feels like something horrible?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I always, you talked about the process of evolution, and I think about like sometimes it's like you talked earlier about like all the ways not to do something, and I think
Yeah.
sometimes as a society we're like I'm starting to become more of a student of history, and I'm realizing that
Yeah.
people forget. We have very short attention spans. We don't get
Yeah.
taught history, so people are like, well, we have to go through this because we think this might
Mm.
work, and I'm like, yeah, it's not going to work. We've tried that before, but go ahead. I guess we have to try it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because the more you see history, the more you're looking at the past, projecting it also on the future. Like, hey, we've been down this road,
Yeah.
and it is a good reference. But all it also, and I do it myself, by the way. So don't get me wrong. But by doing that, I'm also creating fear for the future, right? I'm
Good
also
point. Yeah.
setting my brain up for that.
Yeah.
So it's a fine line. You don't want to be blasé about life events because that would mean that you're just shutting down and you're not active in the process. I'd like to be active, but I'd like to be active with a voice that's forcing self-reflection and
Hmm.
biases.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the idea that people aren't coming to life with their own biases is really, it's like, no, you're biased. Period. Don't question it. Don't
Yeah.
don't 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 like don't defend it. There's nothing worse you could do than defend it. Like
Yeah.
the best thing to do is sit in the meditation of where is this showing up for me and what shapes and forms and how is that influencing my interaction with the world. Like
Sure.
that's a beautiful life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I have friends on the left and the right, and I always laugh because they'll think that I'm part of the other party, right? They'll always assume, well, if you're not with me, you're against me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what I'd like for you to do is just see that the framing of how you see the thing is also through the lens in which you've created, which you're not even aware of having created.
Sure.
And neither side will be able, in the sense of America at the moment, especially, to see that there's a lens. It's just there's right and wrong, and that's sad for me to be around because I'm wanting people not to think ever in terms of right and wrong, but more in terms of what is it my bias that makes me see it this way, and what
Mm-hmm.
does that tell me and inform me about me, society, where we
Hmm.
are as a humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of me, we're biased. Anybody that says they're not biased just is blind to their bias. So the thing is,
Yes.
do I recognize my bias? Can I try to take a more objective view? And the only way to,
Yeah.
to do that, first of all, is understand that you do have bias. And we all, as I said earlier, it's really interesting where this combination of, as they'll, think nature versus nurture. We're all
Yeah.
born with a certain nature, but we're also informed by the circumstances around us, by our parents, our teachers,
Yeah.
events in our lives. Those things shape us also, and then
Yeah.
we get to make a choice how much we let them shape us.
Yeah. You know what I'd prefer society to say is honestly, it might sound like horrible, but this is what I'd prefer, especially when it comes to like in America, race relations. I'd rather like each individual say, I'm a racist. I just don't fully know where and how yet completely.
Yeah,
And in that way, the question isn't to defend against it, it's the exploration of what can I discover about myself that may be uncomfortable. and
yeah,
and and that's
that's a really interesting point because being a black man born in America, I never wanted to be a racist or see race I mean I'm just a person. When I was a 5 year old kid, I'm like, what difference does that what color my skin is? And then I had to admit when I was in my 20s, it's like Well, it does make a difference because society says makes a difference. So
Yeah.
yes, in a sense, I tell people we all judge people. When you see somebody,
Yeah.
you do. Don't tell me you don't judge people. You do, and we all do it, right? But it's understanding that you do that.
And that's the point. And if you have any defense there, any defense, then what it does is it blocks your willingness and your capacity to look inward because you don't want to be seen a certain way. Going back to the discussion we had about the identity. If
Hmm.
my identity says that I'm not a racist,
Yes.
then the likelihood that you're racist is pretty high.
Yeah.
Now, when we say racist, it's a label, and that's a bad thing because we all know that labels create, fragmentation and confusion. But what I would say is then let's take it back to the essence. There's a bias that I'm not willing to look at. And I'd rather that we were willing to look at everything, like everything, which is again why I wrote a book on death, because it
Right.
was the least comfortable topic for me to address. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go into it because it's uncomfortable. And the same with race relations. No, I'm not going to defend and try to pretend like there's something I need to defend. The sitting with the question is a beautiful thing. It really is a beautiful thing. And unfortunately, as a society, we're not there yet because why? Again, identity.
Hmm.
If we don't want to be seen a certain way, we won't allow ourselves to reflect on the areas where we don't feel comfortable.
Yeah. That's
And
a
I'd
that.
rather feel a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really, really important point. This identity thing and not wanting other people to see us a certain way, not even wanting seeing ourselves a certain way. I hear people. I
Yeah.
just read an article a couple weeks ago about like people say I don't see color, and I'm like, yeah, come on,
Oh, it's
please.
painful to hear this. It's just so painful. But
Yeah,
it's if you think about it, underneath all of these things are they believe themselves to be very good people, right? These are
hmm,
not bad people,
right, right.
it's just it's they haven't reflected on where that's not true yet because they have an identity that they're trying to uphold.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, Andy, we're coming to the end of our time. I really appreciate you spending time with me this morning for you.
Mm.
Anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about?
I just as I was sitting here talking to you, it was very emotional for me at times, just knowing and looking at, I presume it's your daughter behind your shoulder,
Hmm.
yeah?
Yeah,
And and when with somebody and I see that's the journey behind them,
yeah.
and it's really behind you. There was something beautiful in that it didn't we didn't get into it because this isn't where we are right now in our talk. But there was just something beautiful in that I was with the whole time we were talking, although we never discussed it.
Well,
So
thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that. And just like my daughter's behind me, I know your mother's behind you.
yeah,
These are people who have influenced our lives, continue to influence our life. You talked about grief earlier, and you said something like we don't ever get over it, and or something to
yeah,
that effect. And we don't, but we carry it with us, and
yeah,
we allow it to shape us and to inform us. And it's made you, it's helped shape you into a beautiful person who's sharing with other people your journey and your vulnerability. So I want to say I appreciate that very much.
yeah. Well, it was great being with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
You know, AndyChaleff.com, my name.com is great. I do my Substack. I'm doing a byline now in Psychology Today. It's a lead story on Psychology Today,
Hmm.
which was the story of my mom's death and writing letters and gratitude and how that affects brain science. So I did that. And there was a nice
Wow.
Esquire. I got a feature in Esquire magazine this September, which was uh, which was on a friend who told me that he was going to end his life,
Hmm.
and he just asked me to be there for him and not stop it. And so I
Oh,
wrote the feature about that experience, which was very intense. And yeah,
oh, wow. Well, again, thank you for being here. Everybody, look up Andy Chaleff, andychaleff.com. Great to meet you. Congratulations on the book and good luck.
thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good morning.